We're going to do a show on slavery, and I also want to explain that how they sold my child, my children. My children were sold just like I was sold. They would take our children and they would sell them off. And this is my son, and I know he's going to be sold too. It started in the 17th century, probably even before. It started with the economy, cotton. Y'all know what these are? It's called Manila. They went across the ocean and they bought slaves with this. And the chiefs and the tribes over there would give up some of their guys, or they would go and attack a smaller tribe. And they would give them this. The white man would give the chiefs these. And then the chief would give them some of his tribesmen. Once they got these, they put them on a boat. And when they put them on the boat, they brought them across many, many waters. And when they got across those waters, they were branded. They were branded, letting you know what plantation that they belonged to. Or once they were here, if you were a bad slave, they would brand you in the face. They would brand you here, or they would brand you in the back. This would tell them what plantation that you belonged to. It was very hard to get away or run away with a brand on you. After they had branded you, they would take you to an auction block. And in that auction block, they would put you in something like this. They would put this around your neck. They would put these around your arms. This part here would go around your feet. And you would be shackled and stand on the auction block. And they would also put these around your neck. It's a slave collar. And they would sell you. You would be standing up, being auctioned off to the highest bidder. Once you were sold and taken back to the plantation of the ones who bought you, you had a job to do. Now, when they brought the Africans over, they couldn't speak English. So the majority of them was considered to be bad slaves, or they needed to be beaten. The reason was, it wasn't that they were bad slaves, they just couldn't understand. So once you were sold and put on the auction blocks, a lot of the Africans who came over here, they could not speak English. So the way that they would communicate is through the beats of the drum. This drum is over 200 years old. And once they were on that plantation and they would beat the drum, someone else from another plantation would reply until Massa found out what they were doing. And then that was cut out. So once you got on that plantation and you had a job to do, if you were going to pick cotton, if you were going to be the house servant, if you were going to be the cook, every slave had a quota. And if you didn't get that quota done, where's the whip? Old massa would bring out this. You were beaten with whips or either cat o' nine tails. Cat o' nine tails is a whip, but on the end of it, it has 9 things on it. Either balls are gonna be on the end of it, sometimes razors. So if you're getting hit with this, it's like getting hit 10 times at one time. Now, when the slave was on the plantation and they were sold and they were given that their job that they had to do, let's say, for instance, there was a slave and he ran away. Well, the slave master would get the overseer and tell the overseer to get old Big John, and Big John would be the big old stud on the plantation, and they would go and find that slave, and they would have this. And that's a badge. It's a slave catcher's badge. And with this, he would put it on, and he would ride, and they would find the slaves. And when they find you and bring you back to that plantation, you were tied to a tree. You were beaten unmercifully. But I guarantee you, after that beating, they wouldn't try to escape anymore. That was a bad, bad beating. If you had a child and they sold you on that auction block, this is for the children. They would take these and put them on the children. This way, this one go on this one, and this would go on that one. They would take this, run it through there, run this one through there, and this lock would be put on the end. The reason they did this to the children is because if you sold mom, of course a kid's gonna run after their parent. But if the kid has these on, they can't run. So not only did they chain the adults, they even chained the children so that the children could not run away. Now, once they were on that plantation, they had a job. This is a slave rattle. And what this is, it goes on the leg, goes on your leg. This will tell master 1 or 2 things. Either you're out in that field, you're working, or you're running. And if he hears this, if Massa hears this, he's gonna get that overseer, he's gonna get the biggest buck on the plantation, and they're gonna find you. And when they find you, out's gonna come the whip. And over a period of time, you'll be sold off. They would sell you to another plantation. Then we get down to these other slave collars. If they were to sell you on the plantation to another plantation, you would have a different collar. And this is what would be on your neck with this lock. So never think that, well, they ought to just took this off. You can't take that off. It has a lock. We come on down to this. This is an oil lamp. Let me tell you something about this lamp. Massa coming home at night and it's dark, and he's on his horses. Some black slave was gonna be in front of the horse, holding this up, running in front of the horse, like this, so Massa can see. Massa get out that wagon, better not step in no mud, better not get no dirt on him. You better hold this light where Massa can see it and hope it don't go out. Because if it does, there's a beating for you. What we have here is the slave indenture. This is J.C. Clark, who was one of the first slave owners that actually married a slave. This case here went all the way to the Supreme Court. And what happened was he married the lady. They had children. They sent the children away to school. While the children were away at school, the mother died. Now remember, the father died. Now remember, he was married to a slave. So when the white man died, the other people from that town, they came and they put the lady back into slavery. They sold her off and took most of the land and everything. When the children came back, they were looking for mama, and they never found their mother. She was sold into slavery. They never got all of the property. That case went to the Supreme Court, and they ended up with a piece of the property. And here is the papers where he bought that slave that he married. From slave ship to being ripped from your mother's hip, sold to the man with the big whip. Horses are fed and laying on hay beds, yet here I lay, chained, cold, and half starved dead, praying and looking for the day to come, wondering, when will my freedom come? Oh, I've been in the field all day, so y'all can come on in and I'll show you my house. You know, us slaves rarely had a wooden floor, but I've been on this plantation so long I can't hardly remember. I've got cotton that I got hanging all on the walls. I've picked cotton. I've even had to make my own drinking gourds. You know, we has to drink out of these gourds here if you want something to drink. But you know, old massa be's pretty good, 'cause he lets me come in. I hangs my cotton sack on the wall. I comes here. You know, most slaves don't have beds, but I's got a bed. I still has my change when I first come here to this plantation. I still keep these here, but I tell you, it's been a long, long time. Everything I's gotten here, I's had to make. So I's any furniture a slave want, they has to make. So I cuts me down a tree, and see here, I makes me a chair. You see, it's just a tree, but I had to have my chair so I can sit down and do my spinning. See, we has to spin our own stuff here. Slaves don't know nothing about no money. Slaves don't know nothing about store-bought. You have to spin it, you has to sew it, and you has to dye it yourself. That's one of the things I do. But old massa, I's got my fireplace here, right here, with my boiling pot. We has to boil our water. We puts it right here on the fire. Saying, and we have to pick this cotton. But I tell you, picking that cotton sure can cut your hand up and make your hands look so before they time. But us slaves, us is used to that. Us is used to not feeling in the hands. I gave Massa 7 children. 6 was sold. I has this one's left. But I know one day Massa gonna come for her. And he gonna sell her too. Maybe if I'm good to Massa, he's let me keep this one. But I know soon she get old enough, Massa gonna sell her too. Us not supposed to be putting chains. Us not supposed to be beat. Us not supposed to be sold off. Us supposed to be free. I remember this story old slave lady told me. You see, there's these 2 children, one white, one black. One's owns by the Massa, the other, the Massa daughter. Well, these 2 children was about the same age. They's outside playing. So the little white child hit the black child. Blood everywhere. Well, they about 4 years old. So the black child hit the white child back. Didn't leave no mark. But the white child went in the house and told old Massa. Now, mind you, the black child was the cook's daughter. So the Massa come running outside, and the cook come running outside. The Massa say, "You hit my child?" Little girl say, "Yassa, Massa, yassa, Massa." Well, by that time, you know, the old cook come out the kitchen and she was screaming and hollering, "Massa, please, Massa, please," because she knows something awful's gonna happen to a little girl. By that time, the old slave lady hollering, "Massa, please, don't hurt my child. I'll do anything for you." Old Massa calls the overseer. Tell the overseer, "You go get Big John. Take her out to the barn. Take care of her." Well, that old slave driver and that old Big John, they takes that cook out there to the barn. They tie her up and strip her down. And they beat her. And they beat her. And they beat her. Well, as they's in there beating her, Master takes the little black girl, 4 years old, takes her in the barn, tells her, "You hit my child." Little girl say, "Yassa, Massa, yassa, Massa." He say, "Put your hand out here on this stump." She puts her hand out there on the stump. Master say, "Now you look that way." 4-year-old girl looked that way. Old Master took an axe, chopped off her hand, and said, "You'll never hit no one else with that hand Now, causing us slaves figure, well, her not no good for massa no more. That's what we were thinking. Maybe she gets sold off, or maybe massa just kills her. Massa wasn't about to lose no money. Massa fix her hand, put a bucket around her neck, and she hold that bucket. She go out there in that field, and she get them slaves they water. She give them they water, 'cause massa said her's got the one hand, but she could still be a breeder. He can make some money off of her. And that little girl grew up and gave massa 7 children. And that's what happened to the little slave girl that lost her hand. I've been a slave all my life, 'cause I don't know my mammy, I don't know my pappy. I sold at the age of 2. They bring me down now on the Richardson plantation. I comes around, I was first to play with old Massa children, and then I was Mrs. Helper. But then, as I got older, old Massa puts me out in the field, and I'd pick that cotton, we'd work from sunup to sundown. And child, I tell you, if the moon was bright, you worked till you couldn't see no more. And when you get through in the fields, you can go to your shack. 'Cause now, my shack was dirt floor, didn't have no floor, didn't have no bed, you know, we put the hay and make us a bed. Oh, I tell you, my first child that I had was by Massa. Massa comes to the cabin one night, and Massa tells me what he gonna do. 'Cause now, ain't nothing I can do about it. So over a period of time, I give Massa 3 children. 3 children. And he sold them all. So Massa brings in a man. He said, you gonna be with that man. 'Cause now I don't have no choice. I don't got no rights. I just got to do what Massa tell me to do. So one night I was with that man, but Massa come to the cabin and he runs that man off. See, you got to understand, son, what Massa said, that will go. You see, Massa was everything. There was nothing in this world that we could do to stop Massa. See, I had no rights. I could not read. I couldn't write, causing it's against the law. I couldn't look Massa in the eyes. There was for 50 slashes if you look Massa in the eyes. You had to walk with your head down. There's days you be sick, but hus got to go out there and pick that cotton 'cause hus has the quota. And if I don't make my quota, old Massa beat me. So I guess I'll tell you the rest later, son. I just got to go and pick my cotton. This is a picture of the slave cemetery of the Sorrel Cemetery. They have there Captain Stevenson, who was the wagon driver for the Sorrels, and he was a slave. And what I basically do is I go down and I clean the slave cemeteries, and I find the unmarked graves, as you can see, as we did up in here. That is a marker of a slave. Now you have to understand a lot of slaves didn't have tombstones. So they were either a big rock or it was planted by a tree. That was a way for them to remember where their loved ones were, because you got to understand, you're nobody. You know, if you died that morning, within an hour, you were wrapped in a blanket, put in a hole, and then the slaves would say a few things, and then you were back out in that field. So you didn't have time to mourn. You didn't have time to really miss your loved one. Because if you took the time to miss your loved one, you'd probably end up where your loved one was. Because Massa did not tolerate slacking or anything like that. You put them in the ground, you mourn that 2-3 minutes, and then you have to be back in the field. Now this picture here is me standing on the porch of the Northington Plantation in Warden, Texas. That was an actual slave house. It's still standing today. And the insides of it, this is me sitting in the inside. That rocking chair there is made out of a tree that they cut down the tree, because you have to understand, slaves wasn't allowed to go and buy 2x4s or material or nails or anything like that. They had to either make their own things or they did without. You know, they hollowed out their own bowls. They made their own drinking gourds. There was nothing that they could say, I'm going to go to the store and buy, because they were not allowed to have money. Even if you gave a slave money, they wouldn't have known what it was. No concept over money. Here I am at an actual spinning wheel. Now the slaves, they had to spin their own things. They made their material, sewed, hand sewed their own things, and they dyed them. You know, if they had to go get berries or whatever to change the color of the water, that's what they would dye their material in. So slaves didn't have fancy different colored clothes. It was also going to be like a brown or a beige or a green. If you did see a slave with different colored clothes on, it was something that was passed down from their master. And that was something that was basically, that was going on back in those days, that your clothes would be passed down from the master to the slave. And if the master gave a slave kid a pair of shoes and they were too big or too small, they just had to deal with it. But the majority of the slaves were barefooted, and they would take rags and wrap it around their feet to use for shoes, because they didn't have shoes. And here I am again in the slave cabin, sitting in that chair, and as you can see behind me, there's a big old pot. And that big old pot is what they basically cooked in. You would put that in the fireplace and let it heat up, and that's what they would basically cook in. And they also had them a little bit bigger than that for outside. That's where they wash their clothes. They were responsible for washing the master's clothes, the mistress's clothes, the tablecloths, whatever they had in the house. And it had to be done perfect. No wrinkles, no stains. And what we have here is me holding a Bible. Now, slaves were not allowed to not only read, but they were not allowed to serve God, because they were told that God was not for them, because they had no soul. But they had a soul, and God was for everybody, but they were not allowed to serve God. But I tell you what they did was, they would wait till master would go to sleep, and they would get down, go way down back in the woods where they couldn't be heard, and they would give the Lord all the praises and sing his holy name and praise God, and then they would go back to their cabin. So they did have church without the master knowing about it, because if the master even thought that they were praising God or anything like that, they were severely beaten. And this here is a picture of a man, and as you can see his back, he was whipped by his master. And if you can really just look at those, I don't think today any man or woman could stand to have that 50, 60 plus lashes on your back. When you were beaten as a slave, when they hit you with that whip, it would leave marks this big, but it would be all the way down to the bone. And what they would do, they would take tar or a cayenne pepper and slap it in that wound. And you bet not let out a cry. If you were a slave and you were old and the master wanted to sell you to somebody, but he did not want them to know how feeble and old you were, he may come up and say, now look here, old Walter, I'm going to sell you. I want you to get on up on that platform and you stand tall. Now, old Walter might be old and feeble. He might have had a carbuncle or something on his back. Well, all they were going to do was cut it off, put some tar on it to blacken it with his skin. And old Walter, if he walks like this, he's going to stand up straight because he wants to be bought. Because he knows if he's not bought, when he gets back to that plantation, that master's going to either beat him or he's going to kill him because he's no use to him anymore. Negroes wanted cash, and the highest marked prices will be paid for any number of likely young Negroes. Conditions addressed to meet the old establishment of Armfield, Franklin and Company, west of Duke Street, Alexander, D.C., will meet prompt attention. Now that's from this paper. And this is the Dover Inquirer, May 6, 1893. Well, what it's basically saying is about the Negroes that helped in the war. That's what this paper is about. And this one is more ads for slaves. Back then, when they were selling slaves, you just put an ad in the paper, you know, what you wanted. If you were selling the slaves, they would put in there, for sale, female slave, age around 32. They would say what she did, if she was a house servant or a field hand, and they could put a price that they wanted, but that wasn't necessarily a price that they was gonna get. I mean, you can go and buy a kid for a slave, I mean, like 30, 40 bucks. I mean, you were sold and bought like you sell and buy cars. You know, you were nothing. You had no soul. You were not human. You were property. You had no say-so. You know, your mom and dad, you didn't know your mom and your dad. You didn't even know who your mom and your dad was. You just belonged to massa. So that was your mom and your daddy. Light, bright, and passing for white. That's the look of the wagon driver at night. Around the bend, with freedom in sight. Feeling scared and covered by night. Not a white man in sight, and feeling that's right. They start to pray with all their might. As the wagon's wheels rolls, they start to remember of the freedom stories told. So look for the man who is light, bright, that drives the wagon at night. So if you don't come, you've just missed your wagon ride to freedom. I was born on a plantation in a little shack. And just like that little shack, I've been forever held back. But I know a change is going to come. I go to the church to pray. But that old mean massa, he just tells me to go away. But I know a change is gonna come. Then I go to my massa and I say, Massa, help me please. And that old mean massa just beat me back down on my knees. But I know a change is gonna come. Then I call on my Father and I say, Father, can you help me please? And he winds up picking me back up off of my knees. Now I know a change has come. Then I go to God's children and I say, children, listen to me, please. I'm trying to tell you how I got free. A change has come. You see, there was a time when I was beaten and sold in chains. But thank God Almighty, things are not the same. A change has come. Now I can read and I can write. Now I know I've got a future in sight. A change has come. It's been too hard living, but we just can't forget God's giving. Look at the blessing that He has given. A change has come. Slavery ended with the 13th Amendment, which says that slavery is abolished unless you're incarcerated. You want to see slavery come back? Get mixed up into the criminal system, because they're going to tell you when to go to sleep, when to get up, what to eat, what you can't eat, where to go, where you cannot go. Sounds familiar? Hey, did you like that story, huh? You like that story about our history? Huh? Aren't you glad it's not like that anymore? Wow. That was our past. We can't change that. But we can learn from it. We can learn from it. Cut, cut.